I'm Beau Johnson. It's December 21st, 2025. Welcome to yes2hellwith.com. Yesterday, you watched a video about the IRS's frivolous tax arguments pamphlet. If that did not encourage you or urge you to purchase the report on jamesbowersjohnson.com for $1, which is a price point that's not designed for profit. It's designed to get those who want to learn about jurisdiction to commit, then I encourage you to get it. Once you watch this second video and you gain an understanding as to what happened to me, the report is worth the price of admission. To understand the true function of the IRS's frivolous arguments pamphlet, it must be read alongside United States versus Cheek. In Cheek, the Supreme Court held something profoundly dangerous to the IRS and administrative power, and that is that a defendant's good faith belief negates willfulness, even if that belief is objectively unreasonable. Cheek did not require beliefs to be correct. It required them to be honestly held. That holding preserved two things the modern enforcement system regarding taxation finds deeply inconvenient: the jury's role and the defendant's mind, his good faith belief. The IRS's frivolous arguments pamphlet exists in practice to short-circuit the Supreme Court's decision in U.S. versus Cheek. By pre-labeling entire categories of belief as frivolous, the government transforms subjective belief into objective guilt. Once a belief is stamped forbidden, it is no longer examined. Intent is no longer weighed. The jury is no longer permitted to ask the Cheek question: did this man or woman honestly believe what he or she believed? Instead, the government substitutes administrative decree. This belief is not allowed. That is not adjudication. That is preemption. The danger becomes acute when the government imports this pamphlet into a criminal trial in a federal court. The frivolous arguments document is not law. It is not evidence of jurisdiction. It is not a statute. It is not a regulation promulgated under the Administrative Procedure Act. It is not recognized under the Paperwork Reduction Act. It carries no OMB control number. It is an agency-produced narrative instrument designed not to adjudicate law, but to condition behavior, constrain inquiry, and to shape outcomes before a jury is ever impaneled. Yes, this document is deployed as authority. In the criminal trial the federal government brought against me, this pamphlet was used precisely that way, not to rebut my state of mind or good faith beliefs, not to challenge my research, and not to confront my understanding of the law, but to foreclose all inquiry altogether. The message to the court and jury was unmistakable. These beliefs are not to be considered, not because they are false, but because the IRS has declared them forbidden. Imagine the effect on a jury. A document bearing the legitimacy of the federal government is introduced, one that should never be permitted as evidence. Instantly, it is inflating the government's credibility while stripping the defendant of his voice. The defendant received this document, read it, and rejected its conclusions. That rejection itself was treated as proof of guilt. This maneuver directly undermines Cheek. Cheek requires the government to prove willfulness beyond a reasonable doubt. Willfulness requires proof that the defendant knew of a legal duty and intentionally violated that duty. The IRS pamphlet replaces that burden with presumption. Once labeled frivolous, or a frivolous belief, it becomes irrelevant. The intent is assumed. The jury becomes an enforcement mechanism, not a constitutional safeguard. Cheek requires the government to prove willfulness beyond a reasonable doubt. Willfulness requires proof that the defendant knew of a legal duty and intentionally violated or ignored it. The IRS pamphlet replaces that burden with presumption. Once labeled frivolous, belief becomes irrelevant. Intent is assumed. The jury becomes an enforcement mechanism, not a constitutional safeguard. The irony is stark. The IRS insists the public must comply with the Paperwork Reduction Act, that forms must bear valid OMB control numbers to impose obligations. Yet when it suits enforcement, the government relies on a non-PRA document lacking any OMB approval to silence defenses and chill lawful inquiry. From a Liberty Dialogue's perspective, the frivolous arguments pamphlet is not a rebuttal. It is a jurisdiction protection device. It exists to prevent defendants from ever reaching the foundational questions: jurisdiction, consent, and scope of authority. And it does so by declaring those questions out of bounds before they are heard. That is why the list of frivolous arguments grows, not reactively, but prophylactically. Each new entry is another fence erected around cheek. The cheek doctrine is hollowed out not by overturning it, but by rendering it unusable. The Liberty Dialogue's position is clear. A government that must pre-declare which beliefs are forbidden has already lost confidence in its presumed authority. If jurisdiction were clear, if consent were evident, if obligation were undeniable, belief would not be dangerous. Calling an argument frivolous does not make it so, and using an administrative pamphlet to extinguish a Supreme Court recognized defense is not law enforcement. It is defense avoidance. It is defense destruction. Cheek was decided to protect the jury's role in the sanctity of the human mind. The IRS pamphlet exists to neutralize both. The conflict is not accidental. It is structured by design, and it explains with chilling clarity how a republic governed by law is transformed quietly, procedurally, and without spectacle into a system where belief itself becomes evidence of guilt. And as always, may truth reign supreme.